presentation, last year I did one was a little bit more kind of 101, and I apologize, that's the title of this one as well, but this one's probably going to get more into a little bit more of the where the marketplace is, kind of some weird and wonky claims that we've seen. So I'll give you a little bit of kind of a feeler of where the insurance can actually help rather than just talking simply about, coverages and those types of things. Okay. So I'll skip past that. So CapriCMW, so we have we're up to 14 offices here in BC. So we have an office here in the Lower Mainland in Burnaby, and then the majority of our offices are in the interior from Prince George down to Penticton. We are locally employee owned as well too, so you're not dealing with a big kind of corporate head office in that sense. It's the buck stops with me, and being an owner of the company, as one of the owners of the company as well, you hold a little bit more pride, I guess, with dealing with the clientele and how you're managing your book of business. So typically what happens is I usually, if it's not a brand new brewery, I get kind of brought into the mix with an existing plan from another broker and another carrier. And I typically see, I'd say, these 5 or 6 things more often than not as a potential issue for the breweries that hasn't been dealt with particularly well. So your insurable values, which basically means your equipment, your stock, and all your tenants' improvements you put in your space. Typically, most breweries will start off and they'll bootstrap it and do a lot of the work themselves, and they're not factoring in the labor costs when they go to set their values on their policy. So think about this. You have a large claim inside of your space. You have a fire, a flood, whatever the case may be. Chances are you're probably not going to put the tool belt back on to do all the repairs. Now you have to go out and it'll be hiring a full licensed tradesman again to go back and do all that work, but at $90 to $100 an hour or whatever they'll charge. So I find that a lot with breweries once we get in and kind of dig into the numbers is they're basically using kind of raw tangible values of the equipment and all the hard pieces, but they're not thinking about all the time that they would have to put back into it again if they had a large claim along the way and get it back up and running. So something to think about there. Business interruption timeline. So, and we've made this a bad habit on our own, is that typically when you buy business interruption, it's basically meant for you have a claim in your space, you are not making money in the interim, and the insurance will help pay for all that overhead in the interim while you're getting up and running. Most people buy 12 months of coverage. That's kind of the standard lock, stock, and barrel. I'm sure for the ones that are open, I'm sure right now you probably have 12 months worth of coverage. You have to look at it and say, could I reasonably do this in 12 months all over again? So, your whole brewery's down and you've got to start from day one and get it basically open and back at the same revenue level you were at before that claim happened. Could you do it in 12 months? And most people I talk to say no. So you can, when you look at that number, most of my clients have an 18-month period to give them that extra at least 6 months to get up and running, but you can go as long as you want. So obviously it'll cost you a bit more the longer you go, but you can go up to, have a few clients of mine in manufacturing that go as long as 36 months worth of coverage because they know they would have a really difficult time getting specialty equipment in and things of that matter in 12 months. Equipment breakdown, this is it's any type of mechanical breakdown that could potentially happen with your equipment. And typically it's outside stuff that's not within the warranty. So things like power surges or brownouts that might fry out all of your electrical, anywhere from your panels to actual hard equipment. I see a lot of breweries, scary enough, who don't even have that coverage a lot of the time when they come to see me, which gives me a few hives underneath my chin. So it's something that definitely you need and you should have, and it's more than just coverage outside of your warranty. Everybody's like, well, my warranty will cover it. Well, there's a lot of other things outside that warranty, and I'm sure when you go to your manufacturer and try to get something warranted anyway, it's going to be a lot more difficult than simply flowing it down the insurance route. Offsite storage. Mike's McQuiston's not in the room. Direct tap, prime example, right? Or Container World for that matter. When you're storing that stuff there, they are not insuring it for you. So you need to insure it in those spaces. So you need to know where your inventories are off-site and insure those. They're only responsible if they're negligent. So if they have a bunch of pallets on a forklift and they tip the sucker over, then they'll pay you back. However, if something happens that's out of their control, like just happens to be a fire or a flood or something like that, and it damages your product in there, that's not something they need to reimburse you for. So you need to place insurance there. The program that we have gives you $100,000 right off the top. So we don't ask any questions. We don't need to know where it's at. It's just built in. If you have a storage location and you have as long as it's not more than $100,000 there, you're covered off. If you got more, then obviously we just need to know how much and deal with that accordingly. Contract requirements and certificate requests. So anytime you're putting pen to the paper on a contract, whether it be a lease or any type of supplier contract, and there's some sort of insurance requirements in there, as part of the service that we offer, we review it. So if you let us know, you send it to us, we'll give you a little bit of advice on that. And then before you've hopefully put pen to paper, you can make changes if need be. Because I'm sure we all know once you sign off on something and then you try to go back to make a change, pretty much impossible at that stage. So it's not anything we charge at all. It'll save you your $600 or $700 an hour with your legal, and that's part of it. And typically we see certificate requests that go with that. So you'll sign a contract. They'll say we need to see you have proof of coverage, and sometimes they'll ask you for things in the coverage section that are so far out the realm or way more than what you even have that'll end up costing you a ton of money in the long run. Trying to appease those types of contracts. Last one, updating operations and revenues. So I typically see breweries who have policies in place, and it is very obviously they haven't had a meaningful conversation with who they're dealing with as a broker for like quite a few years. So give you an example. I just brought on a brewery here in Vancouver. They actually did about $4 million in revenue. On their policy right now, they were only reporting $1.5 million in revenue. So most people are like, well, why does that matter? Your liability premium is generated off of that. So now what's happening is he's paid a premium of, let's say, for example, $7,000 for the last few years, even though it was done incorrectly. Now we're bringing it all up to date, and now his bill's $12,000. So a big surprise for him. But he needs to do it that way because if he's offside and purposely underreporting to the insurance company, in the event of a claim, they've got a potential ability to make his life extremely difficult in that sense. So the other side of it too is if you start doing things even in the middle of a policy term that you did not let your insurance company know about, they have the ability to basically deny claims. So if you're not doing food service in your place and all of a sudden halfway through the year you decide to start doing food service, those things you need to let your insurance broker know. If you are doing a big, massive event in your place where you've got a full DJ and a full dance floor and the whole 9 yards, and that's not something you normally do, we need to, as a broker, you need to let us know so we can advise the insurance company. So anything that's kind of outside your normal scope that you may have had in that initial conversation is something worthwhile noting. Again, I understand the odd time you're going to have some small little extra events or maybe a closed door event where they'll bring in a casual performer or a little bit of music or something. That's probably not a big deal, but being that I follow almost all my clients on social media, I've seen a few things pop up along the way, and I was kind of like get on my phone and throw a few text messages out and asked if I should have known about something that was going on at the brewery the other day. So give you a little bit of idea of where the marketplace in insurance is right now. So we're going into something that it's not very nice sounding, but we go into a hard market. So a little bit of kind of nerdy insurance background. We've been in what you call a soft market the last probably 15 years or so. So kind of once we crossed over in the 2001, we were in what we call the hard market then, and we've gotten out of it since then. What that means is in the past, prices have been cheap. We could go to different underwriters and say, okay, well, this number is here. Can you shave off $500 $100 or $1,000 and make this happen. Or if you were happening to do a Canada Day fireworks show out the back of your brewery, and most underwriters would not have an issue with that and be okay with it and not charge with it. Now we're starting to see that change. So we're seeing a little bit of pressure on rates for sure. And we're seeing underwriters become a lot more pickier about stuff that's outside the norm. So bear that in mind when you're starting to kind of plan maybe some of these out of the ordinary type events or things that you might want to do at your brewery. Again, having that conversation early so you can kind of factor in for that is a smart choice. Also, what's happening is they're becoming a little bit more cognizant of what you're serving in-house versus what you're doing wholesale. So if you're serving a lot in-house, be prepared that you probably will see premiums jump a little bit on that side versus if you're doing heavy wholesale. So I have one brewery that they literally do 95% wholesale, 5% in-house. So for them, they're not really going to see much of a blip here over the next little while, because really they look at that and say the risk is very slight, right? There's no real chance of over-serving or having any of those types of issues of slip and fall in your brewery when you're just shipping it out the door to the LDB. Whereas most breweries now that I'm dealing with that are opening, they're about the opposite. They're 95% in-house and they're 5% wholesale, if any. So with that, we're just being out in front of clients and talking to them a little bit more and having them understand, okay, where this is going to go trajectory-wise as their revenue goes with it. Luckily, because the insurance company we typically deal with, they're domestic, so they're here in Canada. So they haven't been as aggressive in headhunting premium-wise quite yet. Whereas I've had a discussion with a brewery here on the island, so they deal with a broker on the island who deals with Lloyd's of London. And for whoever's had experience with them, they last year they went $2.7 billion in the hole last year. So they cut their workforce in half. I think it was their total workforce within Lloyd's was something like 4,500 staff, and half of them are gone overnight. So they've taken a hard beating over there. And in her case, where for your breweries that are already open, when you come to me to get a certificate of insurance for pouring at the BC Beer Awards tomorrow, typically we give you that piece of paper. It's free and there's no questions asked. In her case, she had to fill out a 5-page application, and then they charged her $300 at the end of it just to give her the piece of paper. So those are the types of things we're starting to see as this marketplace changes a little bit. And in all honesty, a lot of this issue is because of our industry as a whole. So we treated the marketplace in that soft market for so long that it made it unprofitable for the insurance companies. As much as that's counterintuitive to the general public, they were losing money. So now what's happening is they're trying to bring a lot of this back into line, and with that, you're getting a bit of these negative stories along the way. So luckily, as I said, with the company I deal with, we haven't really seen a big blip or change in rating as of yet. But if you're dealing with certain other carriers in the marketplace, you might be feeling a bit of that pain already. We've also seen a couple carriers here in Canada that have simply left breweries. So they're not doing them anymore. So, or in a large sum. So one of them is Economical Insurance. So I've got a lot of new business out of that, but with it, it's just coming out of nowhere. So people are literally getting 60 days away from their renewal. They get an email from their broker saying, your insurance company's no more. So we're out in the marketplace trying to find you a replacement insurer. So a couple other points I wanted to bring up. To try to be ahead of this, I suggest if your broker's not reaching out to you minimum 60 days before your renewal, you should be talking to them. The last thing you want, and typically what happens with a lot of these insurers, is they only give us about 30 days notice if they don't want to deal with you any longer. So it really doesn't leave a lot of time for you to kind of react and get other options on the table. So being out early ahead of it is just the best thing you can do. For us, we're minimum 60 days. If we know if there ever could be a problem, we would go 90 days. We'd even reach out that early. but being proactive on your own is just the smart thing to do. So be out ahead of it early, for sure. If anybody has any questions, stop me along the way. I'm going to keep rambling on until somebody yells. So some claims. These are the top three here are claims that I've lived with for real. The bottom two are certain ones that I have not had any of my clients deal with. However, I know it's prevalent in the marketplace and have had other conversations with breweries who've had these types of issues. So the hot ferment. So we had a brewery in the Kootenays. They were brewing a batch of beer. Their brewer forgot to set the glycol unit at a cold temperature and went to a hot temperature. Hopefully I don't die here. It's a good reason for me to start speaking faster. And what happened is the beer basically came out as bitter can be. It was basically unconsumable. So they ended up dumping the whole beer. It was to the tune of about $15,000. So for them, they're only about $1.5 million in revenue a year. So that's for them a big hit. And we were able to put the claim through. And it was, where you'll see it on renewal, it won't be that bad. It's just understanding that if you have that one situation and something similar like that happens about 6 weeks later, and you're looking at another bill of that same size, again, the insurance company they'll be reasonable, no doubt, but they're going to obviously put a bit of attention into your file and want to understand what's going on from a processes perspective and why this is currently happening, and how they can maybe slowly recoup a little bit of that over time here. Okay. Infected yeast. So I had this with East Van Brewery. They basically had an infected strand of yeast. So they were brewing beer, had no idea. They had 2 full tanks. I think they were 60-hect tanks. And then they had a whole pile of pallets of beer that were at the LDB in Delta in their warehouse. So they got a phone call from the LDB saying, your cans are about double the size that they should be. I think we have a problem. So they pulled them out of the warehouse and basically destroyed them all. And then at that point, the brewery kind of went and tested these couple other batches, and they were in the same route. So they dumped that all down the drain. So that one's sale value was a $65,000 hit. And we wrote I didn't write a check personally, but the insurance company wrote a check, and they had it within 3 weeks. So I don't want to promise you that you'll always see checks that fast, but in saying that, those are types of real instances that hit a brewery on a pretty regular basis, and we're in touch with that. Yes, Melinda?
So with talking about that,
yes.
for us, we calculate whatever the value is.
Sure.
65,000.
Yeah.
Does the insurance pay out a percentage of that, or is it like
Straight across. So they'll want to have if you're dumping a tank, they'll want to have an understanding of what of that would have likely have been wholesale, what would have been kegged and served in house, because there's obviously a major pricing difference between the two. But yeah, it's as long as you're insuring your stock at sale value, they will typically pay sale value on a package that we have put together. Yeah. Did I see another hand or no? Keep going. Okay. Filtration. I'm just going to call it DE because I'm going to get it all wrong, but there you go. Diatomaceous earth. So we had a brewery in the Kootenays again. Something going on over there in the Kootenays. They had an issue with the DE. So what was happening basically is that the flavor of the beer was off. So funny enough, I was actually there, and we got called in from a pub, and we were doing a bit of a taste test across a canned beer, one of their kegs, and I think a can from a whole different batch, and you could taste the difference across all three. They didn't know what it was at the time, but about 3 months later, they figured out that it was the DE that was an issue. So they've gone back. We haven't pushed a claim yet. However, they're trying to work with the supplier to see if they will reimburse them on that end, because it was very obviously that it was the supplier's issue. Time will tell if that happens. However, if it does not, and they have to go down the route of insurance, that would be something that would be paid as well. They would consider that a spoilage type situation in that case as well. So I think that one they had mentioned they're about it's worth about $25,000 to them, beer wise. The two that I know happen, but I haven't lived one yet, is beer leakage. So going back to your prime example here about maybe you're transferring beer or whatever the case may be, and something's not sealed up properly, and then all of a sudden we have a nice flood of beer that literally goes down the drain. Or we see it probably a little bit more in the wine industry than we do in breweries necessarily, but we see the whole classic forklift in the side of a tank, and then out comes the beer. So I've lived that one in the winery world a few times before. Liability in general, I put liquor liability and slip and fall, but this is going to be, I would say if you're talking premium increases in general, that is probably where you'll see it the most. So again, if you're serving a lot in-house, bear that in mind. That will typically be charged at a higher rate. If you're serving food, especially like full food service, they will charge more for that. So those are things again to consider if you're a newer brewery, what operations you want to introduce in there or not. Slip and fall, we don't see. I personally, knock on wood, haven't had any. Same with over serving. I think this day and age, people are a lot more sophisticated about that. They've planned ahead. And I know myself personally, if I'm going to a craft brewery, really my intention isn't to go there and get that gooned. At that point, I'm going there to enjoy some beer and not be in that kind of state. However, I'd say if you're going across the whole cross section of the industry, typically liability claims on over serving and things of that matter are the driver for sure. Okay, that's it. Yeah. Yeah.
That in-house liability be something like if you could prove that no bill is more than 3 drinks a person?
Yeah. Yeah. So, I mean, you should be doing that period anyway, the tracking of it. So I'll give you a little bit of an idea of how these liquor liability claims go. I go into your brewery, I have 1 beer. I go into Melinda's brewery, 2 blocks down the road, I have 3 beers there. And then I go down to your brewery and have a couple beers here. And then I jump in my vehicle and I hit the brain surgeon of all brain surgeons in a crosswalk, and now they're wanting to come after us. When that lawsuit kicks off, and Carlos will probably attest to this, you're going to get sued, you're going to get sued, and you're going to get sued because you served that person at some point down the evening. So while your processes might be tight and they will matter and be helpful in the case of defending yourself, there is a bit of just the way our society has gone now where it's everybody's problem now. So even though you were the first beer of the night to be served to that person and did everything right and there was no issues, because now brewery number 2 or 3 might have served them a couple more beers that they shouldn't have, it could potentially become your problem. Now, these policies will step in and defend you. And, typically what happens is I see that they go away. However, those are kind of the risks and issues that we're seeing now in the industry, and just the way that the law system has gone is that it's just kind of, it gets spread out and they're essentially trying to find money anywhere they can find it. And once you have insurance, sadly, it's a good thing and a bad thing. Bad thing in that they know that there's money there to be paid because there's an insurance company in your corner to defend you. So. But if you don't have insurance, that's another bad one. Yeah, exactly. Luckily, the LDB won't let you get away with that. So obviously you guys are looking to start out. Like I said, the last presentation I did was a little bit more of a 101. So it kind of went through all the coverage lines and things that you need to think about, and also giving you a bit of budgeting. So if you want to talk offline, I've got some cards there. You can always just pop me an email, ask questions, or we can chat down on the floor, and I can give you a little bit more of an understanding of all the things you need to think about from day one of digging to opening up the doors. So, yeah, claims are nice, right? I think it gives everybody a little bit of a real feel of like all the things that you would never think of, and even think about, how many breweries phone me and say, holy crap, I don't know how many batches of beers I dumped down the drain along the way and never had a clue that it could be insurable. So again, thinking about long term and not making the claim every 5 minutes, but at the same time if it's big enough to you, and or at a time of the season where you badly need the beer, say May or June or July. Something to consider that way. So good, perfect. Thank you.